You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. I love that as I'm hitting the button to start the show, it pops up that you're offering me a fantasy baseball trade. Is that where your mentality is today?
What else are we going to talk about? Garrett Crochet doesn't want to pitch for the rest of the year?
Well, we should probably talk about realistic trades and those that probably won't happen now, because this Garrett Crochet situation is so interesting to me. Think about this. We have a pitcher who now, according to all reports, his representation contacts all the teams in Major League Baseball and says, if you make a deal with the White Sox for our guy, he's not pitching in October, which is the whole reason they would want to make a deal for him, because they want to contend and they want to win and so if you want him in October, he feels so worrisome about his own health and his own arm, which has been used more this year than all the other times that he's been in Major League Baseball combined. Like he is well over the innings that you would have expected. And if you want him for the second half and you pay the premium the White Sox are asking and you want to pitch him in the postseason, he believes he'll likely break down, get injured, possibly have a dead arm next year, possibly have an injury where you're going to be paying him to sit on the bench all of next year. He'll probably have to go get Tommy John. Who knows? But he's fallen apart. So you're going to have to sign him to a ton of money. And by the way, he already turned down the White Sox when they tried to extend him, according to reports just a couple of months ago. I mean, it pretty much is a no-trade clause. It's pretty much Garrett Crochet saying, I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay right here.
Well, and more so than that, it's Garrett Crochet being really honest. I mean, you want to talk about the innings issue, okay? Let's talk about the fact that in college is when he had his innings total at the highest peak, and that was 2019 when he pitched 65 innings. 65 innings. He's at 111 and a third right now.
Yeah.
He hasn't pitched, that's just not a whole lot. 54 innings in the majors in 2021, and then he was hurt, and then he had the Tommy John. So that is a guy who, by all means, I don't fault him for a second for sitting there saying, my arm feels like jello. I'm sure it does. I'm positive that man's body is just feeling every bit of it, because this is almost twice the amount of innings he has ever pitched in his life. I mean, maybe if you go back to high school, he was one of those kids that took a few extra innings, or somebody took some liberties with him because he had the arm. But I mean, this is a guy who, honestly, if I were the White Sox, I wouldn't be worried about trying to trade him to a contender at this point. I mean, I think that's a nice thing to do, to dangle it and sit there and see, can you hook somebody in who's going to give you way more than they should at this juncture for this guy. But really, it's kind of what we talked about with Chris Getz asking for the whole house and the whole farm and major league ready talent and all that stuff. And really, putting parameters on this that teams are going to have a hard time filling. Even the Dodgers, who could sign Crochet to an extension, but are going to have a hard time filling. This is a guy that if I'm the White Sox and I'm keeping him, not only am I not trading him, but I'm probably shutting him down for the most part in the second half and letting the guy rest and recuperate. I'm coming up with some sort of a phantom injury or something and trying to get this guy's arm, healed, for lack of a better term.
There's a more interesting thing that they can do, and we may be talking about it when we're sitting around doing the live 108 Sox in the Basement appearance starting at 5 p.m. on August 9th at Cork and Kerry at the park at 33rd in Princeton. Get out there. It's free to come in and hang out with us. Enjoy the award-winning burgers, the ballpark favorites, the amazing menu before Cubs Sox, that incredible bar, the indoor-outdoor seating. Bring the kids. Should be an absolute blast. And again, August 9th, and see everything that Cork and Kerry is doing at corkandkerry.com. We may be talking there about the fallout over not only who they acquired and who they couldn't move, but what if Garrett Crochet isn't even on the team that weekend, not because he was traded, but because the White Sox do something a little sneaky. I saw James Fox put it out. I had to go look it up myself. Garrett Crochet coming into this season, according to Fangraphs, when they listed his MLB service time, 3.028 years of MLB service time. And the White Sox could actually option him now back to AAA and say, you know what? You don't think you can pitch in October? You're that concerned? You killed your trade value? You ticked us off? Well, if you're that concerned, we'll option you down to AAA where you can have a lighter schedule and we can monitor you better in low-pressure situations against non-major league hitting, and you can kind of rest up, and we'll bring you back in a month. And if they did that, he's going to fall short of getting a complete year of MLB service time. He'll be below 4 years at the end of the year, and they will essentially add another year to Garrett Crochet, re-increasing his value and controlling him for an extra season at this very low price that you have him at. Like, they could do it. The union would lose their minds, right?
Wouldn't they ever?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but you already have a terrible reputation. The White Sox as a team, terrible reputation. We've seen all these polls. Players don't like them. Everybody kind of thinks they're a laughingstock. Like, you're already a terrible reputation. A team like the Rays would do it. They were the team that always took every advantage of all the rules to penny pinch all of their young pitchers and hold on to as much control as possible. There's a few teams that might consider doing it after the move that CAA and Garrett Crochet pulled. I'm curious if the White Sox would even consider it up in the front office today. Because it's interesting if he doesn't get moved and they really, really felt like he cut out their legs from underneath them. Would they then say, hey, if you're so concerned about your arm, let's slow you down a little bit down there in Charlotte, or maybe even send you to Birmingham just to kind of get some rest, and we'll see you in a month or so. And instantly you change everything about how long he's actually controlled by the team.
That's the kind of gamesmanship that if I'm the White Sox, I am seriously thinking about doing, knowing that the union is going to be annoyed by that. But I doubt they're going to open up that can of worms more so than what they would do is just completely shut him down and just say he's just not pitching for the rest of the year. And, if they do send him down, it would be with the idea that it's like, okay, we're going to put him on the IL with some sort of a phantom soreness. And then when we reactivate him, he's going to come back. He's going to do his rehab work down in AA or
yeah, but
A-ball.
that wouldn't affect his service time. I think the thing that would stop him from doing it is you never re-sign him if you do that to him. You see what I'm saying? Then he hates you. And I would rather than be big boys and sign a quality player to a long-term extension. That's what they should do. This whole idea that he was even on the market or that you were trying to move him with all the control you already have on him was ludicrous to begin with. So I love it. Personally, as a fan, I love it. This is the greatest happy accident in the world, okay? The fact that he did this is just like when Ken Griffey Jr. screwed up the trade of Griffey Jr. to the White Sox in 2005 that would have taken Aaron Rowan and I believe other pieces away from the White Sox that were instrumental in one of the greatest postseason runs in history and brought us a World Series. I mean, what could have happened? Would something have changed if you make the trade and it was a player that stepped in and changed it? And here we have a player influencing what the front office wants to do. And in the end, what he's doing is good for me as a fan because I want to keep him.
And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that word got around with Chris Getz's blessing.
Oh, so you think it's possible Getz doesn't want to move him? Because we did talk about that, right? We talked about how Nightingale was probably getting his stuff from Tony and Jerry. And when the first thing got rejected, it was like, well, we're going to have to move the kid. And we were like, do you think Getz really believes that? Because you saw other people, right? Remember Stone's on the radio. There were other voices that all of a sudden were out there immediately saying, oh, no, they're going to keep him around. Garrett Crochet is going to be in a White Sox uniform for a long time. And we thought there might be a split in that front office. So is it CAA or is it CAA with Getz in a wink, wink, nod, nod because he's trying to do an end around in the front office?
I think Getz knew exactly that was going to happen. And I think Getz knew exactly what was going on. Because I also think Chris Getz, being a former player, he knows enough pitchers. He knows how this works. He's not dumb in that regard. He knew that Garrett Crochet was going to be worthless in the second half of a season. Like I said, I think he dangled him. And I think it goes along with what Bob Nightingale's reporting and what the national media picks up on, that, we have this ace-level guy. We're willing to talk because, again, if someone is willing to give Chris Getz just an absolute pile of talent, major league ready talent in particular, that could remold the team in a lot of ways, Getz will absolutely make that trade if someone steps up to the plate and gives him what he wants. And wouldn't care a lick spittle about whether or not Garrett Crochet finished out the year or got hurt or whatever, but that's the way that trade goes down.
Sox in the Basement listeners, for exterior windows, doors, patio doors, storm doors, look no further than Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. You go into their showroom. They're not going to come in and trudge mud into your house, pet your dog, and put their feet up on the table. Some dingy little display window. No, you go into their place and you see everything in full living color. No pictures in a magazine, an owner on site to answer all of your questions, just like there'll be an owner on site during the install. They use all their own installers and don't farm out the work. They've been doing it that way for 40 years in Oak Forest since 1985. All major brands are custom made, no stock items. That way you get a perfect fit. Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest is a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. Join us on the phone line right now. First time guest on the show. I'm excited to have her on from Baseball Isn't Boring and Pitch and Moan, that podcast with Johnny Gomes. Courtney Finnicum is on the line. How are you, Courtney?
How are you guys doing?
Great. I'm glad you're on because I feel like a lot of things you put on your social media and even say on the podcast that you're doing, and as a fellow person who has multiple podcasts, we both know the struggle. There's a lot of content we're putting out there to different audiences, but I feel like we're in lockstep on a lot of stuff. And I've been reading your stuff laughing, and I'm like I have to have her on the show.
Well, and I appreciate being on it, of course. You guys do great work. You yourself do great work. I love to partner with baseball minds that, like you said, we're in lockstep, and we're both suffering right now. We're both lifelong Sox fans, and there is nothing positive to put out there about this team. And that's tough when you are constantly having to come out with content. And basically all you have is to either make jokes or just be in misery. So I kind of take this as like my White Sox therapy with you. So I appreciate this.
Well, and one of the things that you look forward to are moments like the draft. At least you have something to talk about. And the trade deadline, which is fast approaching. And now we have Garrett Crochet essentially creating his own no trade clause by saying that if they do trade him, he's not pitching in October unless he's got an extension. And teams already know that he turned down the White Sox extension offer if reports earlier in the season are true. So it makes it very difficult to move the guy. And now it seems like Garrett Crochet will probably be on this team at least into the offseason, if not beyond.
And in all honesty, when I read that yesterday, part of me was like, wait a minute, maybe this actually accidentally is a good thing for the Sox. Because, you know, this is a seller's market right now. I think we're actually finally officially seeing that. You know, certainly with the Marlins trade yesterday and this Mariners trade yesterday, you know, there's prospects to be had. And I almost feel like we maybe accidentally lucked out with keeping Crochet at least through this next off season, and maybe until his contract is up. And maybe we can actually have a fantasy of building a decent pitching staff around him and actually having something to watch for the next few years. What a concept. So I'm a little more optimistic now that we might actually keep Crochet at least through this next year, through this rest of the year.
It is interesting because I read a report the other day that the White Sox have been disappointed in the offers for Eric Fetty, which is funny to me because Eric Fetty is a pretty good pitcher, and you would think a lot of teams would be interested in him, and noted they could probably give a little less than what the Sox are asking for Crochet. And it would be fascinating to all of a sudden see Chris Getz, who did hang in there really late on Dylan Cease and get a really good pitcher in Drew Thorpe. And these other two prospects that are down there both have a high upside, and we may see Iriarte before the season ends and definitely competing in spring training next year to be a part of the pitching staff one way or another. You know, he held out. He seems like he's a poker player. So I keep wondering, will it be underwhelming in terms of we think 10 guys are leaving this team and it might be 3 or 4, and a guy like Fetty could even still be on the roster because they have him for next year. You could trade him in the offseason. You could trade him at the next trade deadline.
And that's actually a very good point, is that we're all expecting that, like you just said, is complete, you know, doors open, you know, everyone must go clearance sale going on. But that might not be the case. And again, I pause because I'm like, well, maybe this is a good thing. But I look at an Eric Fetty, and I do think that the White Sox need to make something happen with him because, you know, Garrett Crochet, in my mind, is a part of the future. yes, Eric Fetty, could be on the staff next year, but he's still, at the end of the day, not a part of the future. And he's a guy, that I think is pitching extremely well this year, clearly, which is exciting. He's beyond anything I pictured he would be this year. But to me, this is a chance where you got to pull the trigger on a guy that has not historically had these strong numbers in the past. And I feel like the iron's hot with Eric Fetty, and they do have to find a trade partner for him. But I agree with you. I feel like this market is a little strange when it comes to the Sox, because I feel like a guy like a Luis Robert, he's overvalued in a lot of ways, I guess amongst us in Chicago, where a lot of teams look at him and say, well, he's an injury-prone guy. He's really had one full healthy season. He can be strange at times in the field. Like, I feel like maybe some of these guys that we think could be moved, we just overvalue. So I think that's a part of it as well.
And that's something you're able to kind of pick up on, I think, because of both the podcasts that you're on. Baseball Isn't Boring and Pitch and Moan are also looking at a lot of things nationally, and you're coming across the opinions of people that are outside of the market and what they think of the White Sox looking in. So I'm curious, not only what you think, but also what you're hearing from those that are maybe looking in. I'm sure at some point you've had a conversation with Johnny Gomes, that's a former MLB player, and you talk to all these people that are outside of the market. You see Chris Getz, a guy that was an unlikely general manager. Most teams wouldn't have taken a guy like him and just promoted internally like Jerry Reinsdorf did. But you've seen Brian Bannister brought in. You've seen a new direction with their pitching. You've seen kind of a switch in philosophy as what kind of hitters they targeted in the draft. You see positives, but then you see Pedro Grifol still sitting there as the manager and a lot of warts on this team. And you're like, when is this going to get addressed? So what is your outlook, or what is the outlook that you're seeing other people, or what are they telling you when you're talking to them about the White Sox from the outside looking in? Is this a team that has any hope, or is it just a big joke?
It's a great question, because I remember last year I actually interviewed Pedro Grifol right after he was hired. So he was on with me. Baseball Isn't Boring. It was literally just him and I. And I remember asking him a lot of poignant questions, about the lack of leadership in the clubhouse and, the fundamental concerns that I have about a team that basically can't do basic defensive plays, bad running the bases, injuries. I asked him all of our concerns about this team, and I look back on it now, and really what it was him just giving me a lot of buzzwords, telling me kind of what he thought I wanted to hear and what the fan base wanted to hear. Because of what he claimed he was going to implement in this clubhouse and on this team has been an absolute zero. He has not implemented one thing whatsoever. So part of that, I believe he didn't realize what kind of team this actually was. And I do think, and I've made this argument several times on social media and on podcasts, I feel like the Sox in general don't have a team of baseball players. And when I say baseball players, I mean fundamentally sound guys that do the little things right. I thought Andrew Vaughn would be that guy, and he hasn't been. So I feel like that's a part of it as well, that this just isn't a team that can rise to that occasion that Pedro thought he could bring out of them. But that is a guy that is completely in over his head. The veterans don't respect him. But as far as the organization is concerned, I remember doing a podcast with former big leaguer Jared Saltalamacchia. And when I mentioned that I was born and raised a Sox fan, his first response was, "I'm sorry to hear that." So it's kind of a known thing amongst baseball players that the Sox are known as just sort of a mess, sort of an organizational mess. I mean, from the analytics department that's basically non-existent to, just the clubhouse amenities. It's a team that is ran like a mom and pop organization, and players don't want to come here. And that's a concern. That is a concern when I think about Sox signing potentially marquee free agents, like that ever happens. But if they ever did, that is my concern. They do not have a good reputation organization-wise. They just don't.
Yeah, and it takes a while to change reputations. One of the folks that's getting a reputation, and it's been interesting to watch this year, is John Schriffen up in the booth. And I'm going to point to a tweet that you just put out recently. During that Texas series, Luis Robert Jr. hits one over the wall down the third base line for a home run, and he's just in the middle of a story. And I think Robert is rounding second, maybe third by the time he realizes a home run has been hit. And you wrote, best home run call of the year simply because it was non-existent. Give me your feelings about those that are broadcasting White Sox television right now.
Oh, I have many feelings on this, believe me. It's, to me, this is just kind of indicative of the organization in general. We go from, to me, one of the most legendary voices in the game in Hawk Harrelson to Jason Benetti, who was very popular with the fan base, to really a guy, John Schifrin, who really doesn't have much baseball experience as far as calling games and natural baseball knowledge is concerned. This is a guy who has admitted on air several times that he doesn't know simple rules. He doesn't know why teams do what they do, like the Orioles sprinkler celebration. He didn't know why they did that. He didn't know why Sox fans booed Javi Baez. Like, this is just basic stuff. And to me, this was a typical Jerry cheap hire, and it has backfired and then some. And to me, as I always look at things in a business standpoint, because at the end of the day, this is a business. And I feel like if you're a broadcaster that you are brand new to the market, brand new to the team, and you are constantly making yourself the story and feuding with media personalities, yelling at fans on Twitter, that to me is just not good business. So, I think John Schifrin needs to take himself out of the equation a little bit more and just go back to trying to actually get good at what he does, because he's not very good at this point.
All right, so before I let you go, and I appreciate your time, I am curious, what do you think is going to happen here in the next couple of days with the trade deadline? Is it going to be basically Fetty and a couple of guys that are going, like the Young goes for something? I mean, they're going to move on from Kopech. It's going to be those lower names, or do you think one of the two big boys in Robert Jr. or Crochet actually move?
I do think that the Fettys, the Phams, the Young, Kopech has turned it on, luckily, right before the deadline. That's great. But I think if a team like the Dodgers gets involved, then we could see actually Robert and Crochet potentially go, because the Dodgers are a team that would sign that contract for Crochet. So the fact that they're still kind of laying low, the Dodgers, tells me that there could be something still in the works. But definitely 100%, I think they'll pull the trigger on the lower end guys. Now with this whole Crochet, curveball, pardon the pun, thrown in there, I think there's a chance he stays. But if the team gets aggressive like the Dodgers, there could be a trigger pulled here. So it'll be interesting. It'll be a fun few days, that's for sure.
Courtney Finnicum from Pitch and Moan and Baseball Isn't Boring. Thanks for coming on Sox in the Basement. You're welcome back anytime.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
On the phone line with me right now, the Sox Nerd, Dave Marin. He puts up all those interesting tidbits and trivia notes on the scoreboard at The Rate, and he joins us each and every week here on Sox in the Basement, brought to you proudly by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and check out their Taco and Margarita Festival happening next weekend, and see everything they have going on at lamontdowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me this week?
Chris, sometimes it ain't easy being the Sox nerd. My vow to be Sox positive is really challenging in a year like this, and it's been that way for a while now. A couple of weeks ago, I was bailed out by Michael Kopech's immaculate inning, and last week it was the release of the 2025 schedule. This week, well, let's just empty out the old nugget bag, shall we? Luis Robert Jr. has hit 12 homers this season, giving him double-figure dingers in each of his first 5 major league campaigns. He is one of just 6 Sox players to do that, joining Baines, Abreu, Carlos Lee, Manny Minoso, and Jimenez on the list. Speaking of Robert, he has quietly become the White Sox all-time home run leader among center fielders. He overtook Jim Landis for the lead when he clubbed his 82nd homer as a Sox center fielder on June 29th off Colorado's Cal Quantrill at Guaranteed Rate Field. In case you were wondering, Chet Lemon at 71, Aaron Rowand at 51, and Larry Doby at 38 round out the top 5 of the Sox most prolific home run hitting center fielders. By the way, each of Robert's last 7 home runs have come on the first, second, or third pitch of his at-bat. Dylan Cease threw a career-best 114 pitches in no-hitting the Nats for the Padres on Thursday in the nation's capital. That total exceeded the 113 he threw at Wrigley Field for the Padres on May 8th and the 113 he tossed for the Sox in a 6-inning no decision at Baltimore on April 16th, 2023. Cease's best outing for the Sox was a 1-hit shutout of the Twins on September 3rd, 2022 at Guaranteed Rate Field when he came within just 1 out of a no-no. In that game, Cease threw just 103 pitches. Cease's no-no was not the first time he did not allow a hit in a start. On September 20th, 2020 for the Sox, Dylan was KO'd after 3 hitless innings, but took a loss thanks to 7 walks and a hit batter. On July 20th in Kansas City, Danville's Chucky Robinson became the 202nd catcher to appear in a game for the White Sox. He is the 17th Illinois native to catch for the Sox and the first since Buffalo Grove's Josh Paul in 2003. I see Matt Foster is pitching again, Chris. The right-hander is unscored upon in 4 games at AAA Charlotte on an injury rehab assignment. Foster has not pitched for the Sox since September 1st, 2022. If Foster is going to pitch for the Sox this season, I hope they get him back when interleague play resumes on August 9th against the Cubs. Foster is unscored upon in 20 1/3 innings in interleague play. No pitcher in big league history has that many scoreless innings in interleague play. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox Nerd material on Twitter and on the scoreboard at Guaranteed Rate Field. My zinger? Well, this is more of a tribute than a zinger. Thursday would have been my dad's 94th birthday. James F. Marin instilled in me a love of baseball that started when he took me to my first baseball game, a 13-9 White Sox victory over Boston at Comiskey Park on August 29th, 1970. I was 5. I'm a child of the 1970s and early 1980s, so I saw a lot of bad Chicago baseball growing up. My dad, a thoughtful and reasonable man, could see that bad ball was getting to me. He would often console me by telling me that losing builds character. After this year, no one will ever question the character of Sox fans again. That's it, Chris. More than you probably wanted to know about Luis Robert Jr., Dylan Cease, Chucky Robinson, and especially character building.
So besides Fedde, who do you think realistically gets traded? Because I think the market for a Gavin Sheets and an Andrew Vaughn has kicked up.
One of them's going. I mean, Courtney mentioned all the ones that are at the end of that, she mentioned a couple of people that are like, we all know that DeYoung is going. We all know that Pham's going to end up going somewhere. We're all expecting Kopech to go somewhere. I still am high on the idea that they recognize the same thing we recognize, is that you can't keep Sheets and Vaughn on the same team and move forward. You need to start breaking up some of this, and you need to start going in another direction. You can only have so many replacement level lumbering guys that can either stand at first base or play poor outfield. If you really want to make a change to this team, and if you remember Chris Getz's comments at the beginning of his tenure, he wanted more defense. It is not working out the way that it should work out, and a lot of that I still think is on the manager and what's being built there. And some of it's because guys didn't work out, and some of it's just because the guys they wanted probably weren't available. And he's learned some lessons here in that trying to get defense. I don't think, though, he's giving up on the idea that he wants guys that can play the field, and he wants guys that are baseball players that are not out of position. And so I do think one of them's going. And if somebody's interested in them, I don't think it matters which one he trades.
Yeah, and I think there's really, you could market both, and here's why. There's 2 teams that I'm looking at that really need first baseman, and they both ignored Ty France. And one of them is the Mariners, who got rid of Ty France.
And are in town.
And they're going to rely on Tyler Locklear, who's a rookie right-handed bat. But I could see them sitting there saying, Gavin Sheets would come in handy as a guy who can play a little outfield, can also be a handcuff for a rookie, because the Mariners are still in contention very much so.
Right, a left-handed bat with some pop, right? Not a lot of it, but got a little bit of pop, and you package him with Kopech because they're looking for relief pitching.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's a two-player swap for what the White Sox really want. Like, it could be something along the lines of the White Sox want something. The Mariners are like, well, we're not getting enough with this one player. Hey, you really do need something like a Gavin Sheets, and then boom, a deal gets done because the Sox are able to sweeten the pot. Like, I think that you could see packages. You're not going to see all these guys traded individually for a prospect return.
No, and the same thing goes with the New York Yankees, who right now are trotting out J.D. Davis, who's hitting all of 105 for them, and Ben Rice, who started out pretty good but is down to 196.
Yeah.
And that's a team that I could sit there seeing them put together a package that they would want Andrew Vaughn, and they would want to try and put Andrew Vaughn into that lineup for a couple of years, because they don't need him to be a star in that lineup. They have stars in that lineup. They need a glue guy, and a guy like Andrew Vaughn, who when he's at his best, let's face it, hits towards right field. That plays well in Yankee Stadium, the way, having a left-handed bat would play there. So, those are two teams that I would kind of watch for, and two guys that I would kind of watch for, in addition to Fetty, in addition to any of the bullpen pieces that you feel, up to moving. And I also wouldn't necessarily, in that some teams are trying to move other pieces and some teams are selling. I could see Chris Getz pulling what Kenny Williams did with getting Freddie Garcia in 2004, when they were sort of fringy contenders, but they really weren't going to go anywhere with it. But you set himself up for next year. If there's a contender not willing to pay a price for a guy that you think could help you in the future, that's something I think Chris Getz could do as well. I mean, there's always a possibility.
You're already seeing it. You're seeing a few moves already with major league players being exchanged by teams. The Phillies and the Orioles just did that. So it's not going to be all prospects. I get that. And you know what? You hit the nail on the head with Andrew Vaughn. You right there. Well, every time I yell about him, Ed, what do I say? He is not a centerpiece of the top half of your order. He's the kind of guy that hits in the bottom half of your order when you don't need all that pop and you don't need your first baseman to be one of your big hitters because you have it someplace else. The Yankees, right there. That is a really interesting call there, my friend. And you know what? It won't be, you trade Andrew, unless it's a package, unless multiple guys are moving, and he's part of it. It won't be one of the big names with the Yankees, but they can find something there for sure.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.